if you pop a tire, I mean, I don't even know what your contingency plan would be in that situation if you didn't have like a spare, you know? You'd just be screwed. Right. There's no fences anywhere, so like there's cows just wandering all over the place. You'll be driving along and then you'll come across some foggy reservoir that's like, you know, you didn't even notice it on the map driving up to it, but it's like this expansive lake and there'll be hundreds of cows just kind of hanging around by it in the sky. I've driven through that part of the world and it's never been sunny. It's always been overcast and like scary. It feels like purgatory on earth.
Welcome back to the Unreal Press podcast. I'm your host, John Henry Davis, aka Rhyme, and today I am interviewing a new author who's released a book about a month ago called Fedbook. His name is John J. Stancliff.
Hello.
Yeah, how you doing today, John?
I'm doing pretty good. It's a chill Sunday. Woke up, went to church, came home.
Yeah, it's a perfect day to record. So I guess to follow tradition, I don't usually do this, but LA does this. I'm drinking a really kicking hibiscus tea made by some people that I'd rather not have it known that I'm associated with. But I think you're also drinking something with a little caffeine?
Yeah, I'm drinking a Rain Energy Total Body Fuel Tropical Storm flavor. It's got 300 milligrams natural caffeine, electrolytes, coenzyme Q10, branched chain amino acids, and then I had like a little bit of Jameson beforehand because I'm kind of shy, but and a little bit of a degenerate as well.
You're gonna be fucking zooming.
Yeah.
Okay. So first question, I think this is the most pressing question. It's called Fedbook, which may signal to some people a certain type of content. Is this like a manifesto or?
It's not a manifesto exactly, and I do have to admit though, like, it's definitely an attention-seeking title. Obviously, the etymology there is Fed post, which most people probably know what a Fed post is. It's when you say something so crazy, so kooky that somebody on the internet might think that you're a federal agent instead of just a normal dude. But in reality, the book it's about a bunch of different people that work for different organizations within the U.S. government and or are privately contracted by the U.S. government to do Fed activities. So it was kind of relevant to the content as well. And ultimately, I came up with I have a notes page open on my phone that like all my other titles, and they were just, I don't know, I was thinking about them, and like Soldier of Faith, Knight Without Armor, Heaven Suffereth Violence, Apology to Roger, stuff like that, and none of them really hit as hard. I just felt like it encapsulated it a little bit better, and then you're always thinking about sales as a writer, so and just getting people's attention. It's half the battle, so I went with Fedbook.
Especially as an indie.
Yeah, especially as an indie.
That's a good title for grabbing attention. Now, don't say this if it might incriminate you, but is this based off of true lived experiences, or do you have some sort of connection to that type of work?
No, I don't. It's as far as lived experience goes, there's some scenes in there that are, kind of like, I got out of college like 3 years ago, and so it's sort of my kind of recapitulating what I went through as like a really shallow sort of college radical, but with the conceit that imagining if just being a college radical, I had some friend or was myself a federal agent who was like listening to what I said and could have, put me in prison or something. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's just, everybody in college is a radical. Well, in the humanities, I was a history student. So in the humanities, everybody's a radical of some stripe or another. And the stuff I was studying and the stuff my friends were studying, we like to kind of Fed post it.
Interesting to meet a fellow humanities major. And I'd like to ask if there was one. Was there a particular course or topic that launched you into this college radical phase?
Yeah, so my specialty at college was like the history of science and technology, which most of it, I don't really deal with it too much in the book. I mean, there's maybe like, I couldn't think of anything off the top of my head really at this moment. But the thing I took away from that was just the kind of overwhelming nihilism of the humanities departments, where like at some point you're sitting there, you got like 6 books on your desk and you're writing some, 6,000 word paper about something. And you kind of like take a step back and you're like, what point of view am I even looking at this from? You're like, I'm not pro America, and the university certainly isn't. It's not like theological, you're not looking at this from God's point of view. You just kind of like, it feels like it's coming from this like point of view that's from a different dimension, and it's you can't like make a value judgment one way or another, and it felt really, really nihilistic when I was in it, and caused some like mental and spiritual turmoil for me. So there's some scenes in the book. I mean, if any listeners have read it already, they'll know like some of the like turning point scenes are, because it takes place around a liberal arts university. If you're not familiar with it, in Central Wyoming, which I totally made up. It's totally fictional. If there's actually some Christian liberal arts university in Central Wyoming that resembles this, which I highly doubt, just know it's fictional. I never went there. Yeah, some of the characters, they get involved in things they maybe shouldn't have, just because the main character is a pretty good manipulator and good at manipulating people's nihilism into action that they maybe shouldn't take. It's ultimately the tale of a bunch of useful idiots.
So when you were talking about how you're writing, the sort of writing the demand from you at liberal arts universities, that forced sterility,
mm-hmm.
Did you find writing a novel as like a refreshing break from that voice?
Yeah, totally. I that's one thing I will say about the university system is like, when you're just sit there, you're supposed to sit there and, pull tons of like different research, writing from, you got a bunch of books in front of you, and, you're at the library all the time, and just, it makes fiction like almost effortless. So it definitely was a way for me to continue to practice writing. And yeah, at the same time, like, blow off some steam a little bit from the, frustrations that I was having. I've considered sending it to my old advisor, because him and I had a pretty good relationship. He was sort of like, he understood kind of where I was coming from and my frustrations with the academy. But I don't know. I'm kind of worried. I don't know how he would take it. I feel like he thought I went to the dark side, and I kind of still value his opinion, even though we don't really keep in touch anymore. But maybe I will.
So would he take umbrage with the sort of political stance, or just the attitude towards academia?
I think he would agree with the stance towards academia. Generally, I think just it's a really overused term, but in like normie liberal circles, like political correctness is still a like a totem that is pretty important to them. And there's my book is not like, it's not like harassment architecture or anything like that. Like, or even I watched Fight Club a couple months ago, and I was pretty astounded by just how like radical and unflinching even Fight Club is. And like, my book is not on those levels either. I think, it's more of just like a personal thing with me and this professor's, I was talking to him one time. We met up like a couple months after I had gotten out of college, and I don't know. I was telling him about how like, open borders basically just benefits, rich California farmers who don't want to like pay Americans, and he was acting like I had gone to the dark side. So just to give an example of like some of the like conservative things in the book, I don't know.
Thinking about harassment architecture and Fight Club, those books seem to come from a place of at least performative rage, whereas you seem more disappointed in how things have turned out as opposed to angry. Is that influencing the character of the book?
Yeah, definitely. I definitely had some rage, but I didn't really, it always just felt like something to me that I shouldn't entertain. And I don't know if you could chalk that up to like personal cowardice or whatever, although I don't think Chuck Palahniuk and Mike Ma are like brave people necessarily. Like Harassment Architecture, it's got some really great scenes in it. And I read Gothic Violence too. Both of them have some really great scenes in them, but ultimately it's like, first, there's no story, first of all, and I'm kind of like I understand the whole stream of consciousness kind of, writing sort of what pops into your head and like spur of the moment stuff, but I really think what makes a compelling book is having some sort of plot there, and I think in order to tell the story of what was pissing me off about academia and what I saw dripping from academia to the rest of society, it really needed like a tale attached to it. And I wanted to kind of connect the nihilism that was coming out of the universities with, atrocities that you see in the country, perpetrated by people that are, they're either totally lost or they've been, captured by federal agents, mass shootings, acts of terrorism, etc. I don't know if that makes sense.
Okay, so yeah, it does. On that level, was there a particular inciting moment or an inciting event that you thought maybe serves as like a driving force behind the creation of this, outside of academia, but more so in the news?
Yeah. So this was before I had started Fedbook, although the ideas were kind of germinating. If like I were to lay out like a complete chronology of my work, I think it would, it probably make sense, like where, like Fedbook definitely feels like the culmination of a certain like period in my life, what I was concerned about. One of the first stories I ever published online, which was under a pseudonym, Jaw Santorelli, JAWSANTORLELLI, on surfaces.cx, which was like this online magazine that I think the editor, he made. Did you ever hear of Fluland? Fluland was another like online publication that kind of presaged a lot of the stuff that's popping up all over the place on like the, I don't want to say dissident right necessarily, because there was also a lot of leftist publishing on there as well. It's just mostly like alt-lit type of stuff. So Fluland was one of the first like alt-lit magazines, and the editor of that, I think it closed down, and he went on to start another one called Surfaces, which Surfaces has changed editors, and the editor now, kind of like a transhumanist, transgender, like really scary type of personality that, I don't know, the content on there has just like really gone downhill. Anyway, the first thing that I published online was a story called A Manual for the 21st Century, and I wrote it like in one evening after kind of absorbing the news about the Christchurch shooting in New Zealand, which was in like 2018, I think. And obviously, like if you're on the internet, that was the footage of that, and screenshots were going everywhere. It was pretty, obviously, it was like really disturbing. And there's a lot of people, talking about how, I shouldn't say a lot of people. There's like, the high-minded theorists of capital and the spectacle on Twitter is saying it basically like fulfilled a market demand for violence, which I don't know. That perspective on it totally like blackpilled me. And I wanted to just write something about, I don't know, how I perceive these things to be. So I wrote sort of like are you familiar with the Screw Tape Letters?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of, I think in that similar vein, like, a manual by some sort of, transcendental dark entity, like how to just get people to be at each other's throats and cause widespread, rampant fear. And that's a really basic way of explaining it. It was pretty well received. It was encouraging for me because it was like one of the first things, writing-wise, that encouraged me to like keep writing. I felt like I reached people for the first time.
So I guess, what are you trying to, in that vein, how are you trying to reach people with the content of Fedbook specifically?
Well, my friends have joked with me, because I'm an Orthodox Christian. My friends in my church have joked with me that I'm like trying to write like the Orthodox Turner Diaries or something, which is a total mischaracterization. They're just pulling my chain, obviously, but it's ultimately like a de-radicalization book. I'd have to like go into the plot a little bit, I guess. It's mainly the story of like some useful idiots who, for want of righteousness in the world, and for want of supposedly defending the innocent, get sucked into a plot that's like way bigger than they initially thought. An opportunity presents itself by some shadowy figures, and they're so broken by the isolation and alienation of contemporary American society that it's like the first time where they feel like they have a mission and they have genuine friendship, and it's very tempting to them for that reason, and they get pulled into it. But at the end of the day, the main character is kind of, he's sort of sympathetic to the cause, but he works for a group that's trying to put these useful idiots, either kill them or put them in jail, and there's other characters as well who are even further above that. So I don't know. The point I'm trying to get at there is that just don't be a useful idiot, I suppose.
Yeah, so it does definitely touch on the paranoia a lot of people have, and obviously you said that already with the reference to the book title being a reference to the idea of a Fed post. There's like a paranoia that so many of the people who are radicalized into becoming the lone wolves or other sort of violent terrorists are being handled by clandestine federal agents. However, do you think like a response to the current goings on, if your response is to become radicalized, is that a more rational response?
That was kind of my perspective on it. I tried to show it from both places. Like, I wanted them. None of the would-be like terrorists in my book are, they're not like poor. Their parents weren't meth heads. I wanted them to be like upper middle class, like kind of well-adjusted individuals who sort of come to this through a general ill will toward mankind and like ideology. I didn't want to like, they're just radical because they're poor or whatever, which is something you hear. It's like an excuse you hear a lot. Like, I just wanted to isolate it to like just pure mind. What's the mindset of a person who doesn't have any other attachments but joins these sort of groups,
right?
And can you say the second part of that again?
Yeah. So, can having like a thirst for retributive violence, can that be a rational response to this, or are you likely being either directly or indirectly manipulated?
Yeah. So I definitely think it's a rational response. My bad. That's where I got lost. The character. So yeah, the characters. I tried to express like how developing that mindset could be a totally rational response. There's a scene towards the end of the book in the third act where the main character, who's a private contractor for the federal government, and another character who does work for the federal government, and they're on the same case. They're kind of like, competing. And there's like the federal agent is a woman, so there's like a minor love interest there as well. The main character, Soldier Crane, is trying to explain to her like how, yeah, they might have been entrapped, but at the same time, like, can you blame them for being, entrapped in this? Can you blame them for feeling that this was a rational response to the world, they live in? But at the same time, I think even another thing I wanted to get at is that even if that is a rational response to the world that you live in, it's not maybe just like feds that are like entrapping you or getting you to think that way. Maybe there's transcendental powers that also wish you to think that way, that desire for you nothing. They desire for you to focus on that part of, I think, every man's soul that just desires nothingness, and the pursuit of good can be totally cloaked by or it can totally the pursuit of good can totally cloak that impulse in a man which just desires annihilation. So I was trying to like sorry, go ahead.
Go ahead. No, it's good.
I was trying to show how, how a man who is embedded within some terror cell, but at the same time is, a federal agent or a contractor for a federal agency, can also be a servant of like evil, like spiritual forces, evil principalities and powers without even knowing it. And a useful idiot for a federal agency is not just a useful idiot for a federal agency. He's a useful idiot for a federal agency that is, and the federal agency itself is a servant of some dark, transcendentally evil power. And that's reflected in the character of Constantine and Elijah. That's what I use those two men to kind of illustrate that point. How within these nested cells, you got the Wept, the Wyoming Empty Planet triumvirate. Within Wept, there are men that work for organizations that are really hard to categorize because of how much power they actually have, and it goes way beyond just state power. They're practically a spiritual force that's been exerting influence on the earth since like the beginning of mankind.
Okay, so for you, when you mention your your short story, your short inspired by the Screw Tape Letters, this federal agent who's manipulating them, like the monster, they're largely a metaphor for an all-encompassing dark entity.
I think my personal belief is, I don't know if I would say exactly in those terms. I guess my personal belief is that the history of mankind is the history of spiritual warfare. And maybe they're metaphors. They're definitely, like, within the book, it's not like, Elijah was, contracted by Satan or whatever. In the book, Elijah works for a syndicate out of London, a reinsurance agency based off of Lloyd's of London, which is a really interesting organization if you look into it. They specialize in extreme and unusual risk. So, like, people that insure the, like, pipelines being built through war zones and stuff like that. Lloyd's of London, their biggest insurance claim ever, I think, was the asbestos situation that happened in the 70s where all these buildings had to be renovated, like pretty much every commercial building in the world. It almost made them go insolvent. It kind of like makes you wonder like how it was even allowed to happen. But anyway, I didn't want them, because I think it's kind of tacky personally to just like blatantly put these. I wanted them to be humans. They're not spiritual beings. They're definitely human, but they work for earthly powers that are so inscrutable that they might as well be, and perhaps they are in some esoteric sense, influenced by dark spiritual forces. But they're flesh and blood humans. Elijah is a claims mitigation officer for a giant. Well, I'm kind of spoiling the book here, so if you haven't read the book, just mute this part. But anyway, yeah. So they're not exactly metaphors, but it definitely ties into my ultimate view about the history of mankind being the history of spiritual warfare, and ultimately trying to answer the question for myself and maybe other people, like, is there ever a point where retributive violence does not make you a useful idiot? And I don't know. I think my answer from the book, is probably not, although it's totally understandable how you could get that point of view.
Okay. You mentioned that you're an Orthodox Christian, and that seems to, you obviously said it influences your book. How did you come to that? Were you raised Orthodox or? No. So it goes kind of back to what I was talking about earlier about the nihilism of the academy. I mean, it really wore me down and broke me. Like, I just sitting there wondering, like, what point of view am I actually looking at this at? How can I study history, especially the history of science, where you're like,
you're basically internalizing, because the history of science that I was particularly focused in was the history of evolutionary theory over time, and which is, as far as science goes, I mean, it's like the least scientific thing there is, because I mean, it's mostly just like physics and chemistry, in particular. They're very hard sciences. They're replicable. When it comes to biology, and especially like theories of development, when you're reading like Ernst Haeckel is a good example. When you're reading like 19th century evolutionary theorists who had insane amounts of influence over the national regimes that they lived under, in Ernst Haeckel's case, this was like, a lot is made of like the Nazis being, social Darwinists or whatever, which is kind of a stupid simplification of that. But anyway, you're looking at basically a religious way of viewing the world, and as an academic studying at a high level, you just like don't have any tools at all to deal with it. You're just like, well, this is what people believed. This is how it changed with new evidence and whatnot. But in your heart of hearts, you're kind of like reading it and thinking like, well, if it's changed this many times over such a short time span, like how do we actually know what we believe? When is what we believe going to change so radically that we look back, in the future now and just, say they were crackpots? It just kind of leveled the epistemology of the world like instantaneously for me. And I basically just didn't have like a value system that functioned. I was like, what the fuck is that? What is going on? What do people actually believe? I mean, and you look around, like most people you believe, or most people you talk to, they don't believe in truth necessarily as a concept. They believe in truths. They believe in it's all like the instinct of the average person is very relativistic, which is a total change from even 100 years ago. You would never 100 years ago, unless you were at some really obscure coffee house in like Central Europe, run into someone who is like, yeah, there's multiple truths in society. There's, like the freaking Papua New Guinea headhunter has just as much of a claim on objective truth as like a French physicist. You would never hear that 100 years ago. But today it's like, you'll be in like some freshman seminar and, some kid will like, make an analogous point. So to get back to the question, basically I was psychologically brutalized by this state of affairs. And I hadn't gone to church since I was like a kid. And I basically felt like I was, I respected, there's some Christian figures out there that I kind of respected. Like, I shouldn't say, they're not like intellectuals, just like posters on Twitter who are Christian that I like thought were cool. And I was like, maybe I'm smarter now. I have a better grasp on the world now. Maybe I should give Christianity a try again. And so I did. I found out there's an Orthodox church where I live, and I just went to it. And yeah, the rest is pretty much history. It totally changed my life and grounded me and gave me a value system again, which every man needs a value system. It's impossible. Every person, not just man, but every person needs a value system to live by. Otherwise, you're just adrift, like so many people. Yeah.
It's so interesting to hear you like elaborate on a turmoil that you experience consciously that's probably a lot of people are experiencing subconsciously, which is the idea that you have to treat something that is constantly changing as unshakable dogma. So if in 2 years' time, what was dogma was that, oh gosh, I don't know if we should even bring this up, but if the story for an event 2 years ago was dogma to the point that if you said something else, you were in serious trouble, and 2 years later, the story has completely reversed, what is that doing to someone who's not consciously like analyzing that, but instead just like subconsciously internalizing, okay, what was absolute undeniable truth 2 years ago is now complete fabrication, and that's just a part of my psychology now. reckoning with that.
Yeah, exactly. You can't like trust anything anymore. I think like a good example for me is that was super mind blowing is like Tucker Carlson going on like one of the most like the second I think most watched media figure in America talking about how the CIA killed John F. Kennedy, which was basically just the purview of like Alex Jones and Oliver Stone like not even a year ago. Everything is completely shifted. You just think about all like the freaking 80-year-old grandmas that are sitting there, all they do is watch Tucker Carlson and they're like, oh wow, this institution I've trusted my whole life, killed one of the presidents. That's crazy. I don't know what that's going to do to the world.
Yeah, but like, doesn't it feel like it should do more? Like, shouldn't that be earth-shattering? Like you said, like maybe they're reacting to it, but shouldn't that be like a completely paradigm-shifting moment for the average person to know that, like, something they have rested on, like with the faith that you would sit on the chair that they have exhibited towards, like the official story, we've learned that was a complete lie. Shouldn't that encourage more action than you ever see? Shouldn't that do more than just like radicalize like a handful of lone wolves every year?
Yeah, that's a really good point. It's another kind of contradiction of the totally open media environment. It's weird. It just lulls people into like isolated inaction.
Yeah, exactly.
I don't know how to explain it. It's like a weird because back in the old enlightened absolutist regimes of like the 19th and 18th centuries in Europe, I mean, they were strictly controlling information specifically for this reason, because if people read something that totally shifted their perspective on reality in the state enough, they would do things like take over Paris in like the case of the Paris Commune. They'd start violent revolts. Today we have like a completely open media environment. People get banned off Twitter or whatever, but I mean, like, I always thought that was sort of stupid, like people complaining about that or that it was a joke, because obviously you can, maybe this is it, any worldview you have, you can justify just with the sheer volume of information that exists. Maybe that is the ultimate culprit, is that there's, you can literally believe anything and find some peer-reviewed paper, written in the last 10 years that'll be like, here's this tiny shred of evidence for that worldview. That was another thing when I was in the academy that was sort of, I was writing these papers where I thought I was having like sort of a revisionist point of view, and I thought it was going to be really tough to articulate, and then you just find all sorts of stuff on JSTOR that was like basically following the same line. Like my specialty was so niche. It was like, so I was like a double major in, what was it, like history and East Asian studies, because I had like to keep my scholarship at school, I had to take a foreign language, and I chose Japanese just because I'm not a weeb, I swear to God. I chose Japanese just because it was one of the only foreign languages at my school that didn't use the Latin alphabet. And so my 4 years later, when I'm doing my thesis is on like Japanese evolutionary theorists. There are like 4 or 5, which is 4 or 5 more books than I would expect. There are 4 or 5 books about Japanese evolutionary theorists in the 20th century. It's just mind-blowing. It's mind-blowing to me, because it's like somebody spent like, 70 hours a week probably researching and learning Japanese just to go some dusty archive and like express what some completely wrong Japanese evolutionary theorists had to say about, Darwin and things like that. So my point with all that is, if you have a point of view, just get on JSTOR, get on LibGen, do some searching. You can justify it with peer-reviewed research some way or another. So maybe that is, maybe that's why nobody does anything. It's because they can't find enough people that agree with them, because everybody has a peer-reviewed ideology that is bulletproof to them. I don't know.
Yeah, it's sort of like you said, it's impossible, and I guess that could be a part of the reason why cultural and ethical and moral relativism has risen, is that it's so impossible to find objective truth without someone sitting in seats holding a cross and robes telling you that this is the truth and we've had a council and this is the truth. You sort of have to scramble to find your own pope, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, the Lutherans, the Protestant Reformation, I should say, it's not just the Lutherans, thousands of popes proliferated, but today, there's many millions of popes. It's pretty mind-blowing.
Yeah, so that is just to get back on the process of writing. You mentioned earlier they weren't necessarily influences, but you saw them as maybe relevant in the genre of your book. You mentioned Harassment Architecture and Fight Club. Do you have specific books that influenced you in your writing?
Yeah, 100%. I think the three that influenced me the most were The Possessed or Demons by Fyodor Dostoevsky, which in my opinion is his best book. A lot of people, like Brothers Karamazov is really good. The Idiot is really good. Crime and Punishment is amazing. He's probably, I think he's nearly my favorite author. It's hard to say. But Demons is like unparalleled. It's incredible, and every time I see some like midwit Gen Xer recommending Brothers Karamazov to someone who has like no experience with Dostoevsky, I just like scream a little bit inside. Because the book, to understand today's political climate, if that's what you're indeed trying to do with reading like old Russian literature, is Demons, bar none. The other book, I mean, like more from a craft perspective and like a sort of genre perspective, is A Scanner Darkly by Philip K. Dick, which is phenomenal. It's kind of like the archetypal, I would say, book about, some dude who's investigating some dudes that he kind of likes and forgets like what side of the line he's on. And in that case, he literally forgets because his personality is split in half by substance death, which is the drug they're all addicted to in that book. My book doesn't have that much to do with drugs and things, but I was just more interested in that overall phenomenon. And then my favorite book, personally, and the book I think maybe I don't know. I'd like to think maybe it contributed more to the tone than it probably did, but my favorite book is Wuthering Heights. I wanted to write like a gothic tale, okay, full of passion and romance. So, and the high desert in America is one of the closer environs to match, I think, the moors in northern England. Beautiful, but just totally utterly hostile. So
yeah, and you see a lot of contemporary literature that can be seen as genre, but still gets taken seriously, is like the Western, because of the recognition of what you're saying. You mentioned that essentially the plot, the characters, most of them, or many of them, or all of them, are part of this terror cell, essentially, of, I guess, radicals. Is there something to that construction, or so you don't see that written about often. How did working within that sort of structure for your characters influence you? Did you have any interesting, epiphanies when writing that?
Let's see. I mean, I think it kind of just reaffirmed what I already knew, which is that a group of like aimless young men is like always and everywhere a potential threat to like any kind of established order, which everybody realizes this already. Like people kind of pretend it's not true, but I sort of like instinctively knew that, and I wanted to just be like, I I just wanted to like formalize it in a book, basically. And I think my book helped me to see even more how that could be possible. If you gave these aimless young men like an objective aim, you know, what kind of people they could turn into. They can still be like good men who love their mothers and, you know, cry to their girlfriends or whatever, but they can also be, you know, dangerous to society. So I don't know if that counts as like an epiphany. It was just kind of like, I felt like it reaffirmed it. It was really easy to write, you know, male friendship in terms of, male friendship in terms of we're completely alienated by what we live in. Let's mess it up a little bit.
Yeah, and I've seen that, even though I say it really was not a conception to me, that group of characters for a novel, but I've seen that popping up more and more in, I guess, dissident right-wing literature, which is, obviously, it's like an aesthetic that the right likes to adopt and maybe portray. But it's interesting to see, like, how that dynamic affects particularly the structure of a novel and writing in general.
Yeah, the whole like manner bund thing that people talk about.
I don't speak German. What does that mean?
I think it just means man band.
Oh, okay. Like there's a famous, yeah, my gosh, I Googled it, right? Because in my head I had this famous picture of the IRA walking down the alley. And like,
yeah.
I Googled manner bun, that's the second result. So yeah, I think we're on.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so I guess because you mentioned off mic that you had maybe an excerpt you'd like to read. Do you have a particularly, I guess you have an excerpt, a favorite excerpt or a relevant excerpt from the book you'd like to read?
Yeah, I actually, when we were having the conversation about nihilism in the academy and like the effects it has on people, it's different from the initial excerpt that I had pulled. Maybe we can do the other one later if you would like. But I'll read the one about nihilism because I think it's more immediately relevant to this conversation. So the context for this excerpt is the main character is trying to seduce a young man about his age who works at a car dealership into joining his Christian terror cell, and the young man kind of gives his testimony on his dissatisfaction with society and life as like a single young man with no aim. So I'll just start. Roger shrugged. I go home, I eat, I read a little bit, maybe watch a movie. I go to bed, I come back to work so I can pay my rent and buy myself food so I can come back home, eat, watch a movie, read, and go to bed. It's pathetic. It feels like I'm being punished and degraded for being alive. I don't know what else I should deserve, but the worst part is you live like this for a while and the only impression you get is that, yeah, in a world where millions live exactly like me, why does truth even matter? Why should anybody care? The only people who decide reality get paid to not stick their necks out. They only exist to generate interpretations, new truths. Novelty today is the 50th interpretation of Melville, queering the white whale. You can get it peer-reviewed, use it on a CV, and get hired at some liberal arts college anywhere in the country. Wow. Truth must really be amorphous and branching. There is no one way to live and see, there are only ways to live and see. And this flows to the politicians who prostitute themselves to whichever truth is most conducive to re-election. What does that look like over time? Well, it looks like a Poisson distribution. Eventually, everything will have been believed, some things more than others. So at the end of the day, I'm constantly asking myself Pilate's question, what is truth? The answer our world gives is that it does not matter. And worse yet, it does not matter that it does not matter. That's not what you're here for. You're here to seal yourself off and become a tin man with your own personal set of instructions, incompatible with all of the others. So, that's one. That was a section I thought was relevant to what we had sort of just talked about.
Yeah, I can see the Dostoevsky influence when you listen to that. I haven't read his entire, how do you pronounce it, oeuvre? I haven't read all of it, but that does remind me of at least Crime and Punishment. I can see the influence. So
yeah, Crime and Punishment is so great. I think that's the single book that like put me onto literature. I read it when I was 17, and like I was in, AP literature at my high school, and I think that year it was basically like one of the AP Lit exam questions was based off of, some set of books. Like they would like give their list out, to all of the AP Lit teachers, and the AP Lit teachers would just, assign you to read one of them. And I don't know, just to like gloat on the girls in that class, I was like, I'm going to pick the longest book. And so I picked Crime and Punishment, and yeah, it totally blew my mind. Sorry, I interrupted you though.
No, I really didn't have any continuation. So I'm sort of interested in how. So you don't have to spoil the book. So in response to that soliloquy, does the character offer him something to like remedy this nihilism, or how does he sway these people who seem to be at the point where they don't care about anything enough to be enticed? How does he sway them to his cause?
Well, I think in that case, the character who made the soliloquy, Roger, he has like an enemy in his head, and it's the universities mainly, because he's a former student as well. He's got the enemy in his head, and what the main character, Soldier, offers to him is basically a group that also hates the universities and wants to do something about it. And in that particular scene, actually, Soldier sort of fails his recruiting pitch, because he's not able to convince Roger that like occupying a building on the university campus is like good in an absolute sense. Roger's like, this isn't good, you're just dumping more poison in a poisoned well, kind of. It's not going to neutralize the poison, it's just going to make it more poisoned. But what Roger ends up joining anyways, just out of he goes to work the next few days, and pretty much all he can think about is that conversation, because it's sort of like a once in a lifetime. There's conversations you have that just sort of stick with you, and that was what I was trying to convey there. And Roger's he's a used car salesman. He can't freaking focus on selling people cars anymore, and he sort of gets like soft fired from his job anyway. And after a couple of days, he goes through his sales catalog and finds Soldier and seeks him back out again to try and join the group. So at the end of the day, it kind of does work, and it works mainly through Roger not really having much else to do, and like you said, not having any feeling of not feeling any meaning as a participant in society from like a traditional participant anyway.
Interesting. So in your efforts as an indie author to pitch this book to people, either through talking one-on-one or maybe in ads, what all have you done, either before the release or after, to sort of get your book out there? I started a Twitter account. Like, I used to have one that had like, I don't know. I'm not that good at posting ultimately, which kind of sucks, but like 2 years ago, I had a Twitter account that had like 250 followers or something, which if I hadn't like deactivated it, I probably would have had a much larger audience today. So I sort of regret it, but at the same time, I feel like it was a good thing to get off Twitter for like a couple years. Probably, yeah.
But yeah, at this point, I set up a Twitter account like a year ago, basically to follow the Russian war in Ukraine, mainly. And then my book was coming out, so at the same time, I was like, well, just being real, like the people who sell tons of indie books are the people that have like followings on Twitter. So I was like, I'll just try to post and get something of a following, just as like a side goal to following the war. And that ended up, the writing ended up being the main goal. And I've published a couple of times, with just online literature magazines. Like mainly, I think the only one that I published on with my real name is Apocalypse Confidential, which I don't know if have you seen them before.
No.
Apocalypse Confidential is a pretty good magazine, online magazine. They do these like features. The big one they had last summer was like Summer of the Shark, and it was just like pulpy stories about sharks, and there's like, pretty much anything you wanted to do with it. And I submitted a little kind of abstract piece of short fiction called The Scavengers, based off of like a dream I had. And they published it. So I was really happy about that. I wasn't really like expecting them to. And then the thing I think that helped the most was they had a special where the topic was war, and I wrote a story about a UNESCO like archaeological consultant and a band of private military contractors in like 2008 Iraq and the city of Mosul. I was like double their submission, like their word count limit, but I submitted it anyway, and they ended up taking it, and it got like a ton of attention. It's probably like the most attention I've gotten on anything I've written. It's called Once Upon a Time in Nineveh. And it's sort of just like a pulpy, like black comedy about the Iraq War that I wrote. And after I wrote that, I mean, I published my book like 3 months afterwards, and all those guys at Apocalypse Confidential, like all the editors like retweeted my book and I like my post about it, and I ended up getting like, I don't know, probably I'd have to look on my Twitter account. I think like last time I looked, it was like 10,000 impressions on my post.
Oh, wow.
which amounted to like 12 sales, but which puts you at like what, 40,000 on the Amazon rankings, which is pretty hilarious.
Yeah, it really is. How?
Sorry, go ahead.
No, you can continue. I don't really have anything.
Yeah, so I think that was the single biggest thing. The other thing that I had been doing around the same time was obviously my my Substack, which I've been kind of wondering about it, because I'm like, should I just be like submitting these stories to magazines? Does it make any sense to just like have my own blog? It's hard to like have your own blog in the short term. You really need to be thinking about it in like the 10-year perspective, which is like eventually, if I'm consistent, people will come back to this and check out my old stories, and maybe 1 out of 20 will get some like major traction. And I did get some buys purely off of the strength of short stories that I wrote, so that was cool. But I would definitely chalk it up more to just having been a participant in kind of like the online alt-lit scene with people that have way more followers than I do.
Yeah, that's a good idea. Yeah, I'm surprised that the editors for Apocalypse Confidential were that active with their contributors. That's a much better relationship than I guess some of these bigger magazines will have. Where
they're all like really awesome people. My last Twitter account, I was in a writer like group chat with one of the editors for Apocalypse Confidential. He wasn't an editor back then, but now he's like a fiction editor. His name's Dawson Wooler. He is a great like pulp. He just writes great like pulp fiction short stories. Is the best way I could say it, like genre style. He loves it. That's what he's good at. That's what he sticks to. I would recommend people checking him out. I'm always pestering him to DAWSON WOHLER, Dawson Wooler.
Okay.
Yeah, the like fiction editor at Apocalypse Confidential. He's a good writer. I don't know if he'll listen to this, but if he does, write a novel already, dude. Anyway, that's my biggest complaint to him, is like he just doesn't write novels. He just writes short stories. So one day maybe. Yeah. But yeah, and then other people at Apocalypse Confidential are pretty talented too. Like Max Thrax wrote a book called God is a Killer. It's just like neo-noir set in New England. Blauergeist is, I think, like the guy who founded it. Anyway, there's a lot of good stuff that's posted on there. Some things, you just run into it with alt-lit is like super indulgent, like sexually violent, just sort of creepy literature that isn't enjoyable to read, doesn't have any story. That'd be like my main complaint with those guys. But like as far as alt-lit goes, they're doing way better in that category than like anybody else. Like even a Terror House magazine, for example, which is ostensibly like Matt Forney is ostensibly right-leaning, posts some of the just most degenerate shit I've ever read. So,
Hello?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah, I think you cut out there right after you said Matt Forney.
Oh yeah, I was just saying that Matt Forney is like ostensibly like this dissident right kind of character, but he posts some of the most degenerate like stuff I've ever read on Terror House. So
Yeah.
Good on Apocalypse Confidential for not veering too much into that territory, although they do sort of indulge it sometimes.
Yeah, and that's definitely not, like, that part of the right is not really trad at all. Like, Forney is a pickup artist guy who just happened to also be a dickhead. I'm not going to talk too much, but yeah, like, that part of the right is just not super appealing. But it seems, honestly, like the right made a transition, like, basically in 2015, 2016 to, I guess, more traditional, like the internet right, I mean, more traditional modes, as opposed to red pill era pickup artist stuff.
Yeah, I agree. It seemed like that shift happened, which I think all of those guys would admit was like a good thing for their lives.
Yeah, probably. I mean, fucking 30-something-year-old men probably want to be in this mode as opposed to the other.
Yeah, and just to like kind of ramble a little bit, my own perspective, a little bit of literary criticism here, I guess. I do think, just talking to other people, I don't know if there's a guy named DE, he deactivated his Twitter account like a long time ago. Good friend of mine though, great writer, also Generation Z, late millennial. I think that the people coming into literature now, all of the like sexually explicit, hyper violent stuff, it just feels like a poorly done remnant of the like I don't know, like the freaking Pynchons and the Bukowskis. Like I don't know if that's gonna stick. Like even something like what I was saying, Fight Club feels way more radical than Harassment Architecture because it's so unrepentantly violent and sexually explicit. And Harassment Architecture has some stuff like that in it, but it's like almost on easy mode compared. I think that's the general trend that literature is going to go in, like content-wise. It's becoming more like puritanical and moral, which stylistically, in my opinion, I think it's a little bit better. I don't like reading like hyper explicit, like disturbing sex scenes.
Yeah, same. Honestly, it sort of feels like what Zoomers consider protest and what Zoomers consider to be radical, it may be less radical than what Gen Xers did, because like what was permitted, ironically, when Gen Xers were in their youthful revolution era was a lot wider than what's permitted now. So what's going to get you lit up as like transgressive now is just so tame compared to what it used to be.
Yeah.
Also, it may be inauthentic for Zoomers to write in that way, like they're fighting their parents' revolution when they're trying to be gross and explicit, when that's really not the fight anymore.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, like, you can't really do much better than Chuck Palahniuk and Bret Easton Ellis when it comes to that, which are like the two. They're both gay too, which is interesting. Those are the two, like, probably Paragon is not the right word to use probably for this, but they're like the emblems of that sort of style of literature for sure. And it peaked there. Like, you can't do better than those guys. There's do you ever B.R. Yeager?
Yeah. Yes, definitely.
Yeah, the Amygdalatropolis guy. Mm-hmm. I didn't read that whole book, but I mean, it's just it's just an example. I mean, you can go as disgusting as you want. I mean, it's doesn't make it more compelling. Yeah, cool. Image war culture is like scary and edgy. Yeah. Good point. I'm gonna move on with my life.
Are you still outside of the Substack? Are you still sending stories to mags?
I haven't in a minute, just because I was working on my book, getting that published. I took like probably a month-long break from writing. I just wrote something for Papa James Craig to read, but he didn't even say anything about it. So yeah, that's like but I'm glad he gave me a prompt, because that was the first thing I wrote in like forever. So
it just pester him, like beating him every 12 hours. I'm sure he'll respond. So do you have any? I'm sure this was like a significant effort, but do you have any books on the way? Are you working on anything else?
Everything that I'm working on right now is in the like totally non-committal like brainstorming stage. I want to write a sort of. Did you ever read Gravity's Rainbow?
No, but I mean I've heard of it.
It's like to me, Gravity's Rainbow is really cool because it's like a fictionalized history of the immediate like post World War II era, like the dismantling of Germany and the construction of the post rocket era. It's like a foundational myth. Tyrone Slothrop is like some kind of like pagan trickster god running around the ruins of Europe. And it's really cool for that reason. You learn, like, it's probably the only example of a fiction book that I've read that, like, in 1,000 years, if people are still reading it, they'll be able to discern like a lot about World War II and what it was fought over, and it'll be more significant to them than any kind of like regime historians pans to like liberalism or whatever, because Thomas Pynchon's analysis is just way more out there. It's like a war basically fought to reconfigure Europe to make it more amenable to rockets. And anyway, I could go forever on that. Anyways, what I'm trying to say is that I am not Thomas Pynchon. I'm never even going to probably be close to Thomas Pynchon. Although I think he's a little bit, do you want to emulate him too much? Maybe not. It's his time is past. He was a postmodern writer. Anyway, I think what he did like in terms of historiography with Gravity's Rainbow is extremely helpful, and it makes for great literature. I want to try and do something similar with the global war on terror. And I have, that's kind of what I was attempting with Once Upon a Time in Nineveh, on Apocalypse Confidential, is just like a vignette that I may include in that book one day. And then another story I wrote sort of experimenting with that mode is on my Substack. It's called A Record of Occupancy. It's just about a house through the decades that's occupied by different people, and the last person that occupies it is like he fights in the war in Iraq. So I want to do something like that. That's kind of like a anthology style novel that tells the history of the war from a bunch of different perspectives. That's one idea I have, and then the other idea I have is more of like a kind of going where the money is. I want to write like some sort of I don't know if you call it fantasy necessarily, more like have you read Canticle for Leibowitz or heard of it?
Yeah, I'm familiar with it.
Yeah, I kind of want to do something like that, set in the West, maybe 600 years in the future in the West, to like a story about a young man who finds himself in possession of a county, as some sort of feudal lord, and whatever social arrangement arises in like 600 years from now in the dark ages of America.
Interesting.
Yeah, kind of want to imagine like a Mongol style invasion from like the Dakotas into Montana or something. Just write a fantasy story around that with like more like pike and shot style fantasy. But set in the future, so there's still like things like internal combustion engines maybe.
So that's an interesting segue. I don't know if you want to talk about this on show, but you mentioned that you were from, or at least you live in Montana.
Yeah.
That is, I'm going to say, like, that's a perspective that's probably completely remote to most people listening, and definitely most people in the world. The book takes place in Wyoming. Is there something about Wyoming that was particularly interesting to you as someone from Montana, or is just that, you know, it was close enough, but you didn't want to write about home, or?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. I mean, it was mainly like when I was first started writing the book, I was only sharing it with like friends I knew in real life, and you know, like when you show anybody something you write, it's basically like just taking all your clothes off in front of them and be like, "What do you think?" You know. So I didn't want to do that with. I didn't want to explicitly set it in Montana because I was like, yeah, these people are just gonna see right through me and be like, "Oh wow, you're kind of like a weird dude," which maybe they already knew. But the other I think more important thing was like thematically, the high desert it's like the end of the world. If you've ever driven through Wyoming, certain parts of it are, you know, like the Jackson Hole area is like pretty developed, really rich, just stunning scenery. But it's not exactly like I wanted the desolation. And there's like state roads you can drive through in Wyoming that are like, if you pop a tire, I mean, I don't even know what your contingency plan would be in that situation if you didn't have like a spare, you know. You'd just be screwed.
Right.
There's no fences anywhere, so like there's cows just wandering all over the place. You'll be driving along and then you'll come across some like foggy reservoir that's like, you know, you didn't even notice it on the map driving up to it, but it's like this expansive lake, and there'll be hundreds of cows just kind of hanging around by it in the sky. I've driven through that part of the world like 3 times, and it's never been sunny. It's always been like overcast and like scary. It feels like purgatory on earth. And it felt like the perfect place to set my the tale that I was intending to be sort of gothic in inspiration. So
Yeah, just listening to you describe Wyoming makes me want to see how it's portrayed in the book. Like that's
yeah, it's an interesting place. Like I remember another time I was driving through it, and like there's this factory looking deal, like some kind of refinery thing, like out in the distance off the road, just spewing smoke. And I looked up the company name, and they were mining something called like soda ash, which I don't know. It's like obviously some industrial like throughput material.
right.
But just the name, like they're out there in Wyoming mining like ash out of the sand. It's just it's a fascinating place. It's the end of the world. I'm fascinated with those kind of areas, and it felt like the perfect place to set my book. Of course, when I was driving through it most recently, I was like trying to hit these towns that I thought might seem a little bit like the town my book is set in, but
Okay.
I really don't think that town exists yet. I mean, they're
Yeah.
all pretty dead.
Yeah, I figure Wyoming is just Laramie, and then little hovels scattered throughout the state.
Yeah, pretty much.
Shoot. I guess. Do you want to plug like so where people can follow you, in the development of your works, like Twitter, Substack?
Yeah, sure. So my Twitter account is at Newtroglodyte, NEWTROGLODYTE, and then my Substack is should just be, it's called Nineveh 20XX. It's johnjstancliff.substack.com.
Yeah, and we'll have all those links in the description and in the comment on the video.
Perfect.
So, do you have anything else you wanted to talk about or you want to say before we do the outro?
Yeah, can I read that one section?
Yeah, the section. I was thinking like, where are we gonna get that in? I'm gonna like do it in post, but yeah.
Cool. I'll read it right now. Imagine a great soul, embodied large and terrifying. In one hand, it drinks from an overflowing cup of depravity, murder, license, rapine, unimaginable larceny, and perfidy. In the other hand, it holds a gleaming chalice. Maybe this chalice is even inset with pearls. In this chalice, which the grand soul drinks as greedily, is love of beauty, love of truth, love itself, self-sacrifice, meekness, and innocence. It drinks from both cups at once, and what it cannot drink it spills out onto the continent over which this soul hovers. The love this grand soul knows is as pure and passionate as its hate, which is manifold and universal. The cups are poured out into its members, and each gets their fill and more. It is no surprise that America tears itself apart. What else can it do? America has made great art and literature. It has wrought great genocides and plagues. Coordination despite complexity, purgation despite plurality. One can't say such a grand soul is good. One can't say anything about it at all. In such a soul, all elements of fallen creation are there, and it is a little bit like the world in that way, the sum of all that exists. But in the same way, a kingdom is not just a king and his subjects, but a principality, a power. America is something greater than its constituent parts. It occupies a rung in the celestial hierarchy, but so do demons, so even do the laity. America is a shard of God's image, long since shattered off, may be carried to earth by a fallen angel and fractalized beneath a steady drip of blood and brow sweat, like a stalagmite. This carries certain consequences. Kingdoms, dominions, these are also in the celestial hierarchy, and they have masters who are appointed on earth to guide them. Demons have a master, as do lay people. America does not have a master because the requisite genius has not been yet appointed. Some have claimed in the past to be this genius, but they lack the ability or the ambition to accomplish the task. We've just dealt with such a one. The emperor who's to come will sacrifice nothing for his great dream, which is to tame and command the grand soul. He knows it is a biocultural weapon of mass destruction. In the meantime, we are beset by a leaderless and bodiless rage where nothing is guaranteed but inadequacy and risk. The grand soul has gravitas, and is to be respected in the same manner as a thunderstorm, or a feverish man with a gun. It is not something to be loved. It knows love is something to drink, something which sustains, but it possesses also the ageless and terrible knowledge that where love fails, blood will do.
Wow. Strong voice. And on that note, thank you, John J. Stancliff, for coming on the show.
Yeah, thanks for having me. That was fun.
Yeah, no problem. Ivan Rhyme, a.k.a. John Henry Davis. A lot of Johns in this chat, in this world, in this section.
Yeah.
Who can guess why that is? Anyway, you can talk to John and all the other authors we've talked to and the hosts on our Discord, which is linked. Follow our Substack, which has write-ups and new podcast episodes. You can listen to our podcast on any of the audio platforms you usually listen to your podcasts. Thanks so much for listening.
I may have gone too far in a few places.